वाहिगुरु जी का खालसा वाहिगुरु जी की फतेह
अब जो पीछे
God bless you. Nancy down here? No, not up there. Maybe over here? Can you sit over here? Thank you. So to begin, I wanted to first start with me. We're going to be talking today about the Khalsa Fund. And what I want us to keep in mind as we're talking about the Khalsa Fund is that the Khalsa is not something out there that exists outside of us. We are the Khalsa together, the Sangat is. And you saw the power of the Sangat, of the Khalsa this morning, for those of you who were in Amrit program. As a community, when we come together, we have a very transformative and amazing power. So for those of you who are doing Simran this morning, who are singing along in Asakivad, who are doing Nithin, and you let yourself get lost in that experience, it's incredible what, as a community, the power we have. So today we're going to be talking about the power of the Khalsa Fund, but we're also going to be looking a little critically at our history. So that instead of just talking about Sakhis and going on and on about the same things, we try to actually learn from the past and move towards the future. But to begin with, we're going to start in Eastern Punjab, where Guru Nanak Sahib Ji was born. Guru Nanak Sahib Ji was born in a simple little village, a lot like this one, about 530 years ago. But what he managed to achieve was a complete and radical revolution in every sphere of life. So I don't like to use photos of gurus too much, but for a presentation like this, it's necessary. So there are photos in there. Of course, we need to keep in mind that we don't know what Guru Sahib looked like, and this is just an artist's interpretation. I tried to use older paintings as well as newer paintings, so you can see how over the years Sikhs have understood Guruji differently, over different time periods. So we can see here Guruji singing Kirtan with Bhai Mardana, Guruji doing seva in Langar, and Guruji working out in the fields. And this represents, of course, the three principles of Sikhi of Nam, Japna, Vadke Shakna, and Kirt Karna, right? The Guru Sahib Ji wanted to completely radically change us as people. Our inner lives to connect with Vaheguru. And to get away from the dogma and the rituals that was in the religions at the time. And if you were paying attention to Asakivar this morning, if you're reading along with the translations, you can see that one of the main purposes of Asakivar is really a really strong critique of what Guruji was seeing around him. And he's pretty harsh in it. He's making fun of these people. He's mad at them. He thinks they're wasting people's time and energy, and they're parasites on the community. And he wanted to come up with something radical and different, a way to connect to Vaheguru inside of us and connect to Vaheguru in other people. Now the problem with revolutions is that they're very messy. So you guys can see in Egypt today or Syria, for those of you who follow the news, that even when people have a revolution and they win, things don't get better right away. There's a lot of problems that happen. People's lives are sometimes even better before the dictator was overthrown, for example. If you look at Iraq, before America invaded Iraq, Saddam Hussein was a terrible guy, but a lot more Iraqis got killed during the Iraq war with America than ever got killed under Saddam Hussein. So the problem with revolutions is that when you try to change society, it can become really, really messy, and you can lead to really tragic situations. You can see here that in China, when communism took over the 40 years that Mao was in power, 40 million people died. 40 million, which is more than the population of Canada. Stalin killed over 30 million people. So this wasn't in wartime. This is through starvation. This is through bad government policies. This is through trying to change society. They wanted to get rid of the rich, equalize everybody, make an egalitarian society, make everyone equal. But by forcing it from the top, it led to a disaster. But our gurus are something incredible and something amazing beyond any comprehension of people that we see in the world. Our gurus are operating on a level that's much higher than anything else out there. So Guru Nanak Sahib Ji didn't just come in and tell people, pick up a kirpan, go kill the bad guys, we're going to take over Punjab and we're going to transform the society and we're going to get rid of all the evil that's existing around us. He built things up step by step. So that Guru Angad Sahib Ji first taught people how to read. Guru Ram Das, you can see here, built a city where he encouraged people who were poor or from low caste to start their own businesses so they could be financially successful and independent. Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji started the Akal Sena, which was the name of the first Sikh army, so that the Sikh Panth could defend itself. And then Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib Ji gave his head for the rights of other people, so that even though we had power, we didn't abuse that power. So all throughout Sikh history, with the exception of some pretty awful incidents during partition, Sikhs have never forcibly converted anybody. Even when we had Raj over other people, we never ever converted anybody. We never took away another group's rights. We always respected other people. That's only because of the sacrifice, the Qurbani of Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji. We can see other religions that don't have that example, and what happens when they take over. We can see what Christians did to Native people in North America. We can see what Muslims have done in different countries that they've taken over. But when these groups go and take over other countries, they kill the people that are there, or they force them to change their religion. Sikhs don't have a history of that because we have this step-by-step gradual revolution that the Gurus did. Now we can go on and on about all the amazing things that each Guru Sahib did, from Guru Nanak up to Guru Har Krishan Ji, up to Guru Tegh Bahadur, Guru Gobind Singh Ji. But the key goal that the Gurus were trying to implant in us, the key part of the Sikh revolution, the heart of it, is a very simple idea that Bhai Sahib was talking about yesterday, which is that we have within us a spark of Akal Purkh Vaheguru. That's all it is. That's at the heart of the Sikh revolution. Seva, being a warrior tradition, fighting for other people's rights, all of those things come from that central idea that you, whoever you are, however you look, if you're a man or a woman, if you're black or you're white, whatever you look like, you have within you an equal part of Vaheguru that I have. So we recognize Akal Purkh Vaheguru within ourselves through Naam, through Sangat Kirtan, through Path, through studying Guru Granth Sahib Ji. But how do we recognize in other people? We do it through Seva, right? By putting ourselves below them. Humility is the key to a Sikh lifestyle. So, I guess the slide should have come while I was talking about that. Anyways, the end point of the revolution of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, from Guru Nanak all the way up to Guru Gobind Singh Ji, of course, is the creation of the Khalsa Panth. So once the Khalsa Panth was created, Guru Sahib Ji had finished his revolutionary teachings. And you can see that for the last 9 years of Guru Gobind Singh Ji's life, he was just really trying to make solid the lessons that the earlier Gurus had taught and give us, the young Khalsa Panth, the chance to grow up and take on responsibility on our own. And it was a big responsibility. Now, if the revolution happened 330 years ago, if all the work that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji did was up to this point when the Khalsa was created, then what has the Sikh Panth been doing for the last 300 years? Have we just been taking it easy? And of course, the truth is that we've been taking it far from easy. We have a history of Qurbani, right? Of sacrifices. So we can see here pictures of Zakaria Khan when they were put a price on the heads of Sikhs. We can see the Matas under Mir Manu who had their babies cut up into pieces and put around their necks. We can see Saka Panja Sahib under the British, and we can see young victims of the Delhi riots in 1984. So throughout Sikh history, from modern time to right after Guru Sahib Ji left this earth, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, we have a history of standing up and fighting. But what are we fighting for? What have all these Sikhs been struggling for over all this time? Why is all this bloodshed, all this sacrifice necessary? It's because they want to take that dream that everyone has a spark of Vaheguru inside of them and they want to make it real. That's what Sikh is about. They want to take Guru Nanak's vision and apply it to society. But imagine a vision of the world where everyone is equal, where everyone respects each other and everyone loves each other. It sounds so radical and crazy and almost a little hippie-ish, right? And the problem is that when you have people in power who come up against a vision that amazing, conflict is inevitable. So the government, the people in charge, whoever the government was, be it the Mughal or the Afghani or the British government or the Indian government, when Sikhs are struggling for these rights, the end result is that we're going to have to sacrifice ourselves for the dream of Guru Nanak. So by our count, and what this talk is about is revolutions of the Khalsa Panth, is that there have been 300 years since Guru Gobind Singh Ji left this earth. A generation is usually about 20 or 30 years. So between, my generation having my kids and then my kids having their kids, it's 30 years between generations. We've had, in the last 300 years, we've had 30 revolutions, one for each generation of 6. So from Banda Singh Bahadur in the early 1700s, to the Anglo-Sikh Wars, to the Singh Sabha Lehar, to Gurdwara Reform Movement, independence, Punjabi Suba, and of course, what happened after 84 in India in the last 30 years. So if you look at the dates, the time is right now for our next revolution. The revolution of our parents is over now. Whatever happened in Punjab with Khalistan, that revolution, that movement is over. It's now our time, and not even ours, it's your time, because if you look at Sikh history, any of these things from the Singh Sabha Lehar to Banda Singh Bahadur's time, this was all done by people who were in their 20s, almost always. The leadership of the Khalsa Panth has always been young, and they've been radical, and they've been people who are willing to get out there and sacrifice and put everything on the line. Usually when you get older, you get kids, you get work, and you start thinking conservatively. You don't want to make those sacrifices anymore, unfortunately. The time is now for our next revolution, and we have to see, what do we want our next revolution to be, as Sikhs living here in Canada or America. Now we have amazing heroes in the Khalsa Panth. We can see Mata Pakar, Baba Deep Singh, Bhai Fauja Singh, and Baba Jarnail Singh here. We can go through Sikh history and find amazing Gursikhs, but there's a problem with focusing on the amazing heroes of the Khalsa Panth. The real work that was done wasn't just these amazing Sikhs, it's all the ones that were with them. It was people like you and us, you and me. We went out there and we were in the morche, we were in the wars, we were doing the fighting. We were led by amazing Gursikhs and we were inspired by them. But we have to stop thinking in this very Christian and Muslim sense that somebody will come down and fix everything for us. That is not the Sikh Panth. Nobody's coming from anywhere to fix anything. You know, Baba Jarnail Singh's not coming back, someone else isn't coming here, we're not going to get someone new who's going to all of a sudden fix all the problems in the Panth. It is us who has to get up and do the hard work that's involved. Sikhs working together have managed to do amazing things. So we can see here an example of Baba Burdaji and the Gursikhs of Guru Arjan's time building Darbar Sahib, and we can see a group of just regular Sikhs in the morche in the 1920s. And what we're going to do today is we're going to go through 4 of these revolutions in Sikh history, and we're going to look at what they did. And we're going to do something a little bit radical ourselves. We're going to also criticize what they did. Not criticizing that, you know, they were wrong, but mistakes have been made in the past. And the problem is that as a Panth, we keep making the same mistakes again and again. So you can see the hal in Punjab today, what our situation is with the leaders and type of leaders we have. The reason why is we keep making the same mistakes as a community again and again and again, and we don't learn from the past. Because we have become a community just of heroes instead of a community of people. We've forgotten that the Panth is made up of individuals. Not all of us are perfect. We're all struggling to be on the path of Sikhi, and we're inspired by amazing Gursikhs who help us along the way, but we can't just expect them to do everything. And that's the problem we're in right now. We're expecting someone else to do the hard work and we're not doing it ourselves. We need to do the work ourselves, and we need to learn from our past so that we can really create something amazing for our future. So I want to look at a few of these revolutions from the past, and I want you to imagine that these revolutions were done by Sikhs from villages and towns in Punjab, a lot like our parents were from, or if we're from Punjab. These were normal people who were inspired by Guruji to make big changes. So we're starting off with Banda Singh Bahadur. So Banda Singh Bahadur was, of course, he grew up as a non-Sikh. He took Amrit from Guru Gobind Singh Ji in 1708, towards the end of Guru Gobind Singh Ji's life. And he was given the title by Guru Gobind Singh Ji of Bahadur, which is a very special title that only 2 other Sikhs have ever gotten in Sikh history. And Banda Singh Bahadur was given a very special mission by Guru Gobind Singh Ji. A few months before Guru Gobind Singh Ji left, he called a meeting of the Khalsa, and he gave Banda Singh Bahadur 5 of his arrows. So anybody know what was special about Guruji's arrows? They're gold-tipped, right? And the arrows, 5 of them, of course 5 is an important number for the Khalsa, represented that Guruji was giving authority to Banda Singh Bahadur as the leader of the Khalsa army. Because before this time, the leader of the Khalsa army had always been, Guru Har Gobind or Guru Har Rai or Guru Gobind Singh, Guru Tegh Bahadur, Guru Har Krishan. It always been a guru. So first time, leadership is going to a Sikh instead of to a guru. But along with Banda Singh Bahadur, there were 5 Gursikhs that made up a Panch, that were the Panch Pyare. And the Jathedar of the Panch Pyare was a Gursikh by the name of Bhai Binod Singh. Has anybody ever heard of Binod Singh? So Binod Singh was the 13th descendant of Guru Angad Sahib Ji. Not that that matters, it doesn't matter who your ancestor is when it comes to Sikhi, but it's just interesting that his family lineage was from Guru Angad Sahib Ji's family. So there were 5 Gursikhs. Now the idea that Guru Gobind Singh Ji had come up with is that leadership in the hands of one person is a dangerous thing. But when you're on a battlefield, when you're fighting in the middle of a war, you can't sit down and have a meeting, right? You have to just make a decision and stick to it. So Banda Singh Bahadur was in charge of what was happening on the battlefield, but in terms of what was going on in the Sangat, in terms of issues of Ret, in terms of issues of how to run a Khalsa government, how to make decisions, that was all done through the Panch Pyare, who represented the Khalsa Panth. So together, they were supposed to work together. So the first thing that they did, Banda Singh Bahadur, they came to Punjab from South India, and they went after those people who had committed human rights abuses against Sikhs. Because before you can have change, you need justice. And so they went after the people that killed Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib. They went after the people that killed Pir Buddha Shah. So do most people, have you heard of Pir Buddha Shah? Pir Buddha Shah was a Muslim, who had fought for Guru Gobind Singh Ji with his 5 sons. Or 4 sons? I'm not sure. And Pir Buddha Shah, 3 of his sons had actually got shaheed for Guru Gobind Singh Ji in that battle. And there's a famous story that after the battle was over, Guru Gobind Singh Ji had done his Ashnan of his case, and Pir Buddha Shah had come to the Guru Sahib Ji's tent, and Guru Sahib was wanted to give a blessing to Pir Buddha Shah, and he said, ask for anything you want and I'll give it to you. And you can imagine, in that state of mind, here's someone whose 4 grown sons had just died, and what did Pir Buddha Shah ask for? As a non-Sikh, he asked for the case that had broken off of Guru Gobind Singh Ji's awareness Ganga. It was an important Saki to remember how important cases are. So, Pir Buddha Shah, because he'd supported Guru Gobind Singh Ji, he was tortured and killed by the Mughal government when he went back home. A lot of Sikhs don't know that. And of course, Baba Fateh Singh and Baba Joravar Singh. So, Banda Singh Bahadur, they went there, and what's really interesting is they killed the people who were responsible for the death of Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji. Then they went to the ones who killed Pir Buddha Shah first, before even the Sahibzade. So there was no discrimination that, he was a Muslim, he got killed, we should maybe deal with his killers after we deal with the Sahibzade's killers. There was a love between communities there, because there was a love for Guruji, even with people who were non-Sikhs, like Pir Buddha Shah. What Banda Singh Bahadur managed to do was incredible. And this is one of our key lessons for today. He went through village by village by village. And in those days, the Khalsa Panth was very small. There weren't many Sikhs. He went through village by village, and everywhere they went, all the low-caste people in those villages were touched and inspired by the jivan, by the lifestyle, by the commitment, by the power of those Gursikhs, and they took Amrit and became Khalsa. Most of us, or a lot of us, are from a Jat background. The Jats became Sikhs during the time of Banda Singh Bahadur. They used to be considered low caste people who were doing farm work in Punjab. But when Banda Singh Bahadur came in with the Khalsa army, they were inspired to take Amrit, and they joined the Khalsa Panth. And that's why Jats have such a place of power in Punjab today. It's because of Banda Singh Bahadur and the revolution that he started. Now, Punjab and all of India used to be run on a system called Zamindar. Zamindar system was that there's a rich, big landowner who owned a ton of land. He owned all the land in the village, and all the farmers in the village, they didn't own the land themselves. They had to work on it, and they worked as slaves. And you had to work a certain part of the year, and all of your money went to the Zamindar, who then would pay the Mughal government his taxes, okay? And he would keep, of course, his portion. And whatever was left over, whatever part of the year, that you could keep for yourself. But you didn't own any of the land, and you were pretty much a slave. What Banda Singh Bahadur did is that he went in and he gave the land to the people who worked the land. And economists who study Punjab, because Punjab was the only part of India that up until modern times, now last 20 years Punjab is a disaster, we know that, but up until the 1970s, Punjab was the economic powerhouse of India. It was because of the destruction of the zamindar system. By giving the land to the people, people cared about their land, the land became better used, they were more successful economically, and that's why Punjab did so well for so many years. It was because of these land reforms 300 years ago. So they made a real impact that is still felt today. So, Banda Singh Bahadur, this is an interesting old painting I was able to find on the internet. The Banda Singh Bahadur and the Khalsa army was able to take over all of Punjab within a period of 5 months. Within 5 months, they had destroyed the Mughals in all of Punjab and taken it over. And after they had taken it over, they minted coins in the name of Guru Nanak and Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and they built a big fort, which was called Logar. And that fort was the capital of the Khalsa Panth. Now, Punjab was a very important part of the Mughal Empire, and they weren't going to stand for this for too long. So they launched a huge counter-offensive. Around this time, the Khalsa Panth started to have problems within itself. Can everyone read? All you guys read Lalidar Sarup, so you should be able to read that. At the top line it says, Ik Onkar Fateh Darshan. So, what Banda Singh Bahadur did is that he started to make changes in the Khalsa Panth on his own without the approval of the Panch Pyare. He started to do things on his own. This is a problem that we face in our community again and again when we have one leader. He was an amazing Gursikh. And we're not here to criticize his Gursikhi Jivan, but he came from a Hindu background and he brought some of that influence in with him. So in this hukam, if you guys find the full copy of it, you can see that he tells the Khalsa Panth that they have to stop eating gande and lasan. Okay, this is a Hindu ban that you can't eat onions and garlic because they are considered wrong food that have a negative impact on your body. So he tried to make that a maryada for the Panth. And he also, for some reason, tried to change the Fateh of the Panth from Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh to Fateh Darshan. Now, I don't know why he did this, but he tried to do it. And you can see on his hukamnamas, he actually changed it. That was a pretty big deal to do. And so the Panth started to split. And it's really, in some ways, heartbreaking if you think about it. Binod Singh took Amrit from the hands of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. Banda Singh Bahadur took Amrit from the hands of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. These are two Gursikhs who became Sikhs from Guru Gobind Singh Ji, but they weren't able to get along. But instead of being heartbroken about it, we need to learn the lesson. We waste so much of our time, even today, fighting about issues about it, arguing over simple issues, while our Panth is getting destroyed from the outside. And that's what was happening. Literally, they were being attacked and hunted. In the meantime, they're fighting amongst themselves. And it led to the complete destruction of the Khalsa Panth for quite a number of years. So the Khalsa army got split up into different factions. The main army got stuck in the Pind of Gurdas Nangal. And in that Pind, for 8 months, the siege starts. This painting is not a good depiction of what was happening. They were starving, past the point of starvation, to the point where they were using the bones of their horses and grinding them down to make atta to eat prashad, because they had nothing left to eat. The Mughals finally entered the fort, the little fort where they were, and what they did was that they ripped open a bunch of the Sikhs. They thought that the Sikhs were jinni, what you call genies in English. They thought that they were magical creatures, that they had managed to survive without food for 8 months, and they must be full of gold and jewels and stuff. The Mughals couldn't understand how these Sikhs could survive with no food and very little water for 8 months. But they were able to because of their commitment and love with Guruji. These were Gursikhs who had transformed Punjab within a period of a few months just through their life. They didn't have money, they didn't have power, they didn't buy anybody. Nobody became Sikhs because the Khalsa had a bunch of wealth or land or anything. People became Sikhs because they saw and were inspired by these Sikhs. Now, sometimes we think about Sikh history and we think the numbers must be exaggerated, things couldn't have been that bad, we don't have proper history of what actually happened. So here's an incident we have proper history. The British ambassador was in Delhi when the Sikhs were brought into Delhi, to the Lal Killa. Who here has been to Delhi? So in Delhi, in Old Delhi, there's a famous fort, Red Fort. Have everyone seen it? This is Lal Killa in the background, okay? They came in a procession. The Khalsa army that was left, there were 706, that's it. They were in chains. Behind them were 2,000 spears being carried in with the heads of 6. And behind them were 700 cartloads full of heads. Cartloads, like a big cart. So you can imagine how many Gursikhs got shaheed. They were brought in, and they rounded up everywhere they went. They rounded up any Sikhs they could find. Now, there were Sikhs in Delhi from the time of Guru Nanak. Every single one of them was rounded up and killed. And we, of course, a lot of us have heard the story by Hakikat Rai, who was a young Sikh who hadn't taken Amrit. He was shaheed during this time. His family was from Delhi. They had become Sikh during the time of Guru Harkishan. And he was shaheed. Every day, they killed 100 Gursikhs. They would cut off their heads and hang their bodies from posts all around Delhi as a warning to people. Then 3 months of torture for the leaders of the army, those Sikhs who were like generals in the Khalsa army. So they tortured them for 3 months, then finally they killed them, and then last of all, they got to Banda Singh Bahadur. So whatever mistakes he made, and I want to be careful that even though we're criticizing him, I don't think, I know that I can't compare to the love that he had for Guruji. Banda Singh Bahadur, they put him in a clown costume with a silly long red hat, like a dunce hat, you know in those comics you see dunce hats? So they put him in a red clown costume, they paraded him around Delhi, people were throwing rotting food at him. So they spent the day just making a joke of him, and he was paraded around. Then they brought him in front of the fort, and they brought his 4-year-old son, Ajay Singh. They sat down Banda Singh and they cut open Ajay Singh's chest and ripped out his heart and shoved it in Banda Singh Bahadur's mouth. So for those of you who have kids, I don't know how you could stand to see your own child have their heart ripped out. Then they cut off Banda Singh Bahadur's hands and then feet, and then they ripped out his eyeballs. And then finally they cut off his head. And during that whole time, he never once screamed, he never once cried out, he never once begged for mercy. He stayed in a complete state of Chardi Kala, connected to Guruji. So, well, I want to keep this in mind while we're going through this history, that these Sikhs were really incredible. But we have the capacity as a Panth to make the changes, because we had leaders like this, but the real movement was done by people who were just inspired by these people and joined the Panth. We have the capacity to make big changes. Within 5 months, the Khalsa Panth was able to free Punjab. Now, the next 20 years were one of the quietest periods in Sikh history, 20, 30 years, where the Khalsa Panth didn't do much because so many people had been killed and that generation had pretty much been wiped out. But there were younger Sikhs who were growing up who came of age in the 1730s and 1740s, and they were now inspired to start fighting themselves. And we have the beginning of Khalsa Raj, the very first moments of it. But Khalsa Raj didn't start in some big and fancy way. It started in jungles and deserts and mountains. So you guys saw today the power of Sangat. The way the Khalsa organized themselves back then was amazing, and it's an inspiration for us today. They created small jathas. These jathas were like families. They were women, children, kids, everyone together. And they lived in the jungles, they lived in the deserts, they lived in the mountains around Punjab. And they were fully connected to Guruji. The tradition of Akhand Path started during this time, because they would be on the run all the time. When they got a few days rest, they wanted to get as much law from reading Bani as possible. They would read all of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. These Gursikhs lived a life with no clothes, no proper food, living on horseback, but they managed to have one of the biggest impacts in Sikh history. Now, everywhere they went, people were inspired to become Sikhs. You would think that people living in jungles, like animals, you know, if you were in a village in Punjab and you saw these guys who were living in the jungles, who didn't have proper clothes, who didn't have proper food, you know, would you want to join them? You would think not, but people were joining the Khalsa Panth in bigger and bigger numbers because they were so amazed by the things they were doing. What were they doing? Sorry. They were going out and they were fighting the bad guys. They were killing the oppressors, people who were taking away the rights of others. They were taking money from the rich, landowners, taking money from the tax collectors and giving it to the poor, not just poor Sikhs, but to everyone, like a Robin Hood type situation. They're freeing slaves. One of the big things they did was free slaves. Because the Afghanis and the Mughals had a huge slave trade, and especially girls, but also men, would be taken to Ghazni in Afghanistan, which was a big slave market, and they'd be sold all over Asia to be domestic slaves or sex slaves. And the Khalsa Panth would be freeing these people and taking them back to their villages. In a lot of cases, these slaves were so inspired, they asked to join the Khalsa Panth, because nobody in their villages had stood up for them. When the Afghanis or the Mughals came to take them away, no one said anything. But here were these guys who were on the run themselves, who were risking their lives to free them. Why wouldn't they want to join such a community? That's how the Khalsa Panth was able to achieve victory, by working for the lowest and helping the lowest of the low. Now, what we also created during that time, in the old Banda Singh Bahadur time, we had the Panch Pyare. The Khalsa Panth came up with a new system. It was called Sarbat Khalsa. I couldn't find a good painting of it, unfortunately. There's lots of pictures of the Sarbat Khalsa of 1986, but there's not much of the olden days. But the Sarbat Khalsa was this really amazing institution. We don't have a lot of time to go into it. But every year, twice a year, at Diwali and Vaisakhi, the whole Khalsa Panth would have a meeting. And at that meeting, all the little jathas that were formed, they would pick their leaders. And those jathadars would come together, and they would do Nam Simran together, and they would do Nam Simran, they say, for 2 or 3 days, and do Bhakti Kirtan together, to get in a state of mind where they would be thinking not with their own mat, but with Gurmat. If any of them have problems with each other, they would remove themselves from the Sarbat Khalsa, so as not to bring their personal bias into it. Opposite of nowadays, where we try to get power in our community to screw over people, they were actively giving up power so they weren't causing problems in the community. And then they would come up with a plan of action for the whole community. And they were very basic plan of action, like we have to go attack here, we have to go free this village, we have to go do this, those types of plans. And then the whole Khalsa Panth would agree. But if even one person, let's say one person sitting in the Sangha stood up and said, I don't agree, then they would all stop and they would ask that person what their problem is, what the issue is, why they're criticizing it, and they would try to work around it and make a compromise. Now, of course, they didn't have a problem where everyone was just saying things on purpose just to cause issues. Because everyone was in a state of mind where they're thinking about the Panth as a whole. But they also respected each individual. It was a real democracy. And it happened 40 years before the Americans had their revolution. It happened 30 years before the French had their revolution. It was the first, or I guess the French Revolution was afterwards, like 50 years before. But it was the first democratic revolution of the modern time period. It was the Khalsa Panth. We created democracy before the Americans, before the French. And we made it work for a number of years. So during this time, of course, we have a history of really just horrendous massacres. And the worst one in all of the history of the Khalsa Panth is the Vadakalugala. And in one day, 30,000 Sikhs were killed. So 30,000 Sikhs in a period of a day, I don't even know how big the Afghani army must have been to be able to have killed that many people. And it was half of the Khalsa Panth. So the Panth was that small at that time. It was only 60,000 Sikhs. So half of the Khalsa Panth was killed in one day. And yet, a decade later, Baba Baghel Singh had managed to take over the same La Killa in Delhi. So this was a community that suffered such terrible oppression. Like we've never ever can even imagine living in a state like this. And instead of being heartbroken by it, instead of being broken by it, instead of spirits being destroyed by it, they were inspired to keep fighting and keep winning and managed to somehow take over Punjab completely. But on the other hand, because we're also trying to be critical, they started to make big mistakes. And this was the main mistake they started to make. In the early days, those jathas that we had talked about, they chose the leaders of the jathas. Anyone want to guess how they chose who the jathadar would be? How do you think? It wasn't a Panch Pyare, it was just who had the most respect. It wasn't who the best warrior was, so that was a good criteria. It was who was the greatest Sikh, who did seva, who knew kirtan, who who could read Bani and who could explain Bani. These were the type of leaders that the Khalsa Panth was creating. But by the time the Jathas started to become bigger and bigger, and what happened in the 1760s was that there ended up being so many Jathas, about 70 of them, that they had a Sarbat Khalsa and they said, we're going to create a new system, it's called Missal. Has anybody heard of Missals? If you might have heard of Missals. So they created 11 Missals. Some people say 12, but the 12th Missal is kind of, that's another story. So there's 11 Missals, and these Missals worked on a very different model. Instead of going and living in the jungles, they became like little governments. They would take over Pind by Pind by Pind, all of Punjab. And what they were doing is that they would take over Pind and they would make a deal with the people in that Pind. They'd say, you are under our protection now. So you don't have to worry about being killed. You don't have to worry about people coming and taking your daughters away, taking your sons away to be slaves. You don't have to worry about being forcibly converted. You're under the protection of the Khalsa. And they started to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Their territory started to grow. But as their territory started to grow, you can see Baghel Singh, what he looks like here, he's got a kalgi on his head, is that they started to consider themselves to be like kings, unfortunately. And so by the time you get to the 1770s, 1760s, the leaders of the Jathas weren't regular Sikhs anymore, unfortunately. They had thought of themselves as kings now. And not only did they think of themselves as kings, but instead of the next Jathadar or Misaldar being the greatest Sikh, it just ended up being their sons. So the leader of the next Misal was just whoever their oldest son was. And that's where the system really started to fall apart, where you went from leadership based on Gurmat principle to leadership based on who your father is, which is a problem we see in the Panth to this day. Because the leadership of our Panth today in Punjab is not based on who is a good Sikh, it's based on whether you're related to Badal, right? That's what leadership of the Panth has become, that's what it became during that time. So I don't want to criticize Gur Sikhs like Jassa Singh Namgaria or Jassa Singh Ahluwalia, where these two Sikhs here, they were amazing Sikhs. When Jassa Singh Ahluwalia died, they say that he had 50 bullet and sword cuts on his chest and not on his back, meaning that he had been shot at or stabbed 50 times, but he'd always faced the enemy and never run away in all of his battles. So these were amazing people. Jassa Singh Ahluwalia on the right there learned Sikhi from Mata Jito and Mata Sahibkot. And he learned Kirtan in Delhi. He grew up in Delhi. He actually used to be made fun of by the other members of the Khalsa because he spoke Hindi instead of Punjabi. And they would make fun of his accent and stuff. But the way they started to treat themselves, the way they started to work Kalgis, called themselves Rajas, and they went one step further, and this is really where everything fell apart, is they started to fight amongst themselves. They started to fight for territory. And it became not about freeing Punjab, it became about getting more and more land, more and more power. Until one guy came along who was smarter than all the rest of them and managed to play them all and became the king of all of them. And that's where we get Ranjit Singh. So Ranjit Singh was not a great military leader, he was not a great Sikh leader. And we don't want to criticize it. Punjab never has had a period of prosperity and peace as we did under Ranjit Singh. Art, architecture, literature, this is one of the golden periods of Sikh history. But on the other hand, it's one of the worst periods for Gurmat. Really, just awful. The type of anti-Gurmat stuff that was being done under Ranjit Singh's Raj, we would be shocked that they would even call themselves Sikhs doing the stuff that they were doing. Because they had become so far removed. Within 70 years, they had gone from living in jungles to having one of the largest empires in India, in Asia at that time. But they had lost all their principles on the way. So the lesson for us here is this. They had gone from working for the poor, doing qurbaniya for them, to ruling the poor. And we can see what the punishment, not a punishment in a karmic sense, punishment in the sense that when they removed themselves from the people and became just about the elite, what happened to the Khalsa Panth afterwards. So we're going to now look at the Anglo-Sikh Wars. And this is, not every revolution is a success. And I didn't want to talk about what happened in '84 and afterwards because it is heartbreaking. Because we look at what happened since Chirasi and we see what did we achieve as a community. It looks like all we achieved was Shahidi. It looks like all we have is a legacy of Shaheeds and we have nothing to show for it. And it's unfortunate, it's because what did we do? We made the same mistakes that we had made in the past. And this was the first time we really made these mistakes. was the Anglo-Sikh Wars when the British attacked Punjab. So Ranjit Singh died in 1839, and I want you guys to look at this picture. They're doing Jor Seva over his head, okay? Those are his wives and his, what we would call concubines, female sex slaves, okay? And those are his sort of, sevadars or whatever, they're crying down there at the bottom. When he died, the Jathadar Akal Takht had lit his funeral pyre, and there were 16 women sitting on the funeral pyre. That is what the Sikh Panth had become at that time. Okay? So we need to be careful when we think about Sikh history, how bad they have fallen. So the Sati practice, which was one of the first things that the Buddhists fought against, they did it not with just 16, okay, women sat on top of this giant funeral pyre. This is essentially a picture of the funeral pyre. So these women are going to get burned eventually, okay? Those ones sitting up there. And after his death, Kark Singh was one of his sons, Sher Singh was another son, Nonal Singh was his grandson, Kark Singh's son, and then Dalip Singh was the youngest son. Within a period of 7 years, we went through 4 kings. They all just killed each other. It was a disaster. And the real problem was that instead of a community made up of equals, made up of people working together, like Banda Singh Bahadur time, or like the Jathas, we've become a community of these type of people. So these are Dogre, and these guys down here on the bottom left, Lal Singh and Dev Singh, these two were Brahmin. Now we don't criticize people of where they come from when they join the Khalsa Panth. Because when you come to the Guru's house, it doesn't matter what your past was. However, there's a difference here, is that these people took Amrit not for the sake of any transformative wanting to become Gursikhs, but because they wanted jobs in the government of Ranjit Singh. And every single one of these guys was from the 1830s, so before Ranjit Singh died, and now we have the records from the British government, were being paid by the British government as spies in Ranjit Singh's court. They were all getting money. Those two guys up there, Hira Singh Dogra and Dhyan Singh Dogra, does anybody know what prize they got for selling out the Khalsa Panth? It's one of the best prizes in the world. Do you know? They got the whole state of Kashmir. That's what the British government gave them. So why does Kashmir have problems today? Because Kashmir is a Muslim state. Why didn't it join Pakistan? Why did it become part of India? Because their leaders were Hindus, who actually weren't Hindus, they're actually Sikhs technically. They were Hira and Dhyan Singh Dogra. And why? It's actually all our fault, Sikhs' fault, because Ranjit Singh made these guys his top ministers. And these guys then sold out to the British and were given an award,
Lal Singh was not like a Sikh, right? He was a Hindu.
Lal Singh and Tej Singh, they kept caste, but they were Brahmins. And they were generals in the Khalsa army. They had Singh in their name.
But they had the Raj do use the Singh in their last name.
They started to use Singh in their name during that time period. Yeah.
But they were not Sikhs.
They were not Sikhs.
Yeah.
I mean, we would consider them not Sikhs, but in that time they acted as if they were part of the Panth, you know? And so every single one of our leadership, so the first Anglo-Sikh War was a complete disaster. And we can see here, this is Britain, this is British India. That big red section is the Sikh Empire. So then anybody seen how big Punjab is today on a map? It's tiny, right? So this is what the Sikh Empire used to be. The British had by this time taken over almost all of India except for us. They wanted to take this over really badly. Punjab has always been the biggest prize in India. Why the Afghanis, the Mughals, everyone wanted it. And here you can see some British soldiers stabbing a Sikh soldier. So you look at his uniform, he's wearing a European style uniform. Hanji?
What was the reason with Punjab? Was it because of all resources? Can you just clarify why?
Well, why is Punjab so important? Punjab is important for 2 main reasons. One is wheat, essentially, the crops, the river, the land's been fertile there. It's one of the birthplaces of agriculture for thousands of years. And secondly, it's a gateway to India. The only way to get into India, besides through the ocean, is through Afghanistan and then into Punjab. So if you control Punjab, you control India. That's why the Indian government will never give it up either, unfortunately, unless we really, So if you look at the Sikh soldier, Ranjit Singh was really insecure. Even though the Khalsa army had done so many amazing things, he tried to make us look like European soldiers. And he gave us a uniform and all this stuff, and he brought in all these European guys from Europe, generals who had fought for Napoleon to train his army. And every single one of those guys sold out to the British. So all of the leaders, all of our generals, all of our ministers, the Sikh army is fighting the British, and their own supply lines are being cut. Their own ammunition is being cut. So there was a couple of battles where the Sikhs were winning the battle, but then they ran out of bullets because they were being sabotaged by their own leadership. That was the state of the fun. So when the British take over, in Canada, the Queen actually doesn't control Canada, even though she's on our coin. It's the Prime Minister who does everything, right? So what the British would normally do is that they would keep the local king, Hindu Muslim king, and they would appoint a British Prime Minister, and he would make all the decisions. So that's what they did in Punjab. They left Dalip Singh, he was the only son left, as the king of Punjab, and they took over as, they made all of the decisions go through the British government. But the Khalsa Panth couldn't stand for this, and here you see two Singhs. They're surrounded by British soldiers, it's hard to see, but the guy on the ground is a British soldier, and the Singh has his talwar to his neck. So the British had gone into a fort, and they were trying to steal Nishan Sahibs of the Khalsa to take back as prizes to England, and these Sikhs were fighting back, even though it was like a hopeless battle. There's still that fighting spirit there. And what we have is that 2 years after the British took over, a rebellion started. And it was mainly led by these two people. One, the guy on the left is Sardar Sher Singh Atariwala. His father was Sham Singh Atari, who was one of the leaders of the First Anglo-Sikh War. On the right is one of the most amazing Gursikhs in Sikh history, Baba Maharaj Singh. Baba Maharaj Singh's name was Nahal Singh, but when he would do seva, he would always call everybody Maharajji when he would do Prashad Di Seva in Langar. And so after a while, his name, people started calling him Maharaj Singh. And he was a very prominent Gursikh of that time. But don't think of him as like the Santbir of today, because he was out there fighting on the front lines. He was a warrior. So I guess the closest equivalent we would have is maybe Baba Janel Singh from the modern time period, of someone who has the spiritual and the military side together. They started a rebellion against the British government. And we can see some of the battles of the Anglo-Sikh wars here. You got Sikh soldiers on the right, the British are on the left. And there's the same problem. There's 4 main battles in the Second Anglo-Sikh Wars, but we lost every single one of them. We came very close in 3 of them. In the 3rd one, we came so close that the head of the British Army in India was fired by the British government in London because they had almost lost. But it was the same problem as before. We had no resources. But why did we have no resources? Here's another painting of a battle from the Anglo-Sikh Wars. It was because these are 2 Sikhs with their servant, he's a Hindu guy in the background, is that you can see that the Khalsa Panth had become so removed from its traditions. How did we get success under Banda Singh Bahadur's time? It was by going in and helping the poor, the low caste. How did we get success with the Jathas? It was going in and doing seva for the people who were most abused by the government. These guys would fight for themselves and nobody else cared. Nobody was on our side. The people didn't back us up at all. We were all alone out there fighting the British because we had become rulers. And who wants to back up rulers against another set of rulers, If you're a poor person in a village and the Sardars are fighting against the Angrez, why do you care? It's not like your life's been much better under the Sardars, right? So the reason why we lost was that we were also obsessed with this old model of leadership, and this is a problem we also make in the Panth again and again. When we remove ourselves from the traditions of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, our Panth gets destroyed. We are not a community of kings, we are a community where we are all kings and queens of the Guru. We are all Singhs and Gaurs of the Guru. When you become obsessed with one person being the king, and you're following a Hindu model or a Muslim model and not a genuine Sikh model, then you're going to have problems. Because you can't have a Raja or a Maharaja when Guruji is a Maharaja. In fact, even when Ranjit Singh was ruling Punjab, no Sikh ever called him Maharaj. Does anyone know what Sikhs would call him? They would call him either Sardarji or Singh Sahib. That's where the title of Singh Sahib started. Because the idea of calling a Sikh Maharaj was just too much for any Sikh to bear. Only Guruji could be Maharaj. And so even amazing Sikhs, unfortunately, like Baba Maharaj Singh, their main focus when they were trying to free Punjab in these Anglo-Sikh Wars, the Second Anglo-Sikh Wars, was to get Dalip Singh back on the throne and give him back power. And because they're fighting, like this is a 5-year-old kid, they wanted him to be the ruler of Punjab. This is not a workable model, it's not an authentically Sikh model. And it didn't end up working out. And so the British government was starting to panic. They brought in 50,000 soldiers, the biggest army that they have ever used in their conquest of India. Because usually the rest of India was pretty easy to take over, except for a few key areas. They brought in 50,000 soldiers, 10,000 cavalry, meaning on horses, and hundreds of guns and tanks. Guns and cannons. And within 3 hours, the battle was over, and in 3 hours, 5,000 Sikhs were shaheed. And that's when the Sikh Panth finally lost to the British. Baba Mara Singh, I want to talk about, we want to be inspired today too. He refused to give up on that day. And he kept fighting for a few months later with a small group of Sikhs. Finally, he was caught, he was sold out because the British had put a price on his head of 10,000 rupees. This is 1850s money, okay? I don't know what that is in today's money, but I imagine it's a few $1 million. So 10,000 rupees, someone sold him out. Now the British had studied Sikh history and they knew the power of a shaheed. So they didn't want to kill him. They were already scared of him. If you read the old books, they thought that he had miraculous powers. A lot like the Mughals under Banda Singh Bahadur, the enemy can't understand how we, with no resources, are able to do so much. Because it's not about money, it's not about land, it's not about wealth, it's about love for Guru that gives us inspiration. And so Baba Mara Singh didn't need any of that stuff. They thought he had a kalamat and he had miraculous powers. They didn't want to kill him. They said if we make him a shaheed, it will just get the Sikhs more passionate and they'll start fighting again. So they sent him to British Malay, what is now Malaysia, to the southern tip of it, what is now Singapore, and they put him in a jail cell. They put him in a jail cell that was about 5 feet by 10 feet big. And in that jail cell had 2 windows and they bricked up the windows. And they kept him in the dark in solitary confinement for 9 years in the jungle. For 9 years. So that by the end of his life he was blind and he had tumors growing in his throat and mouth so that he wasn't able to swallow or talk. But he stayed in Chardi Kala until the end of his life, Baba Maharaj Singh did. And what's amazing about the story is that after he died, the local Malaysian people started to talk about this amazing Baba that had lived here and been killed by the British, and they started a little shrine. And when the Singaporean Sikhs came there a few decades later, in the early 1900s, the local Malaysians and the other Indians that were living there said, oh, your Baba had lived here, and the Sikhs had no idea who they were talking about. Then they went and studied the history, and they had now the biggest gurdwara in Singapore is made on the spot where Baba Maharaj Singh was kept in jail. So they've kept his memory alive. That's an amazing inspiration of a Gursikh that he's able to inspire. I mean, they weren't doing anything, the local Malaysians, they were worshipping him as a son, as someone who could give them favors, miraculous powers. But even in a jail cell, locked up, he had such an impact on the people around him that his memory lived for decades after he died. That's the power of a Gursikh. So this was one of the darkest times in Sikh history. Here's a very interesting picture. Who here has been to the Barsad complex? So do you guys see this palace anymore on the side of the Barsad complex? That was a building built by Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So when the British came over, first they used it as a missionary center to convert people to Christianity. Right on the steps, literally the Prakarma of the Barsad. Then they turned it into a police station. And then finally, well, we don't see it anymore, but they built this thing, a Gothic tower, clock tower, to make Amritsar look like London. Thankfully, the Pantha destroyed it in the 1920s. Okay? So this is a time period, there were, by count, 3,000 missionary groups within the first 10 years of the British taking over Punjab, trying to convert people to Christianity. There was a proposal by the British government to make a museum about the Sikhs, because they said in a few years they'll be all gone. I see museum and the banadiye, so people remember that Sikh ki cheez hunde si, That's how bad our situation was. And this is, now we are, in a lot of senses, in the similar situation today. We've lost a battle. And we've been broken as a people. We now have a challenge as a community. How do we respond? How did the Sikhs of that time respond? We're going to go on to our next movement, to the Gurdwara Reform movement. This is a couple of generations later. But this movement was inspired by the generation that came before it, and that was the Singh Sabha led. Okay? So Singh Sabha movement, and some of us might have some critiques of some ideas of theirs, was an incredible movement. And one of the really inspiring things about it is that you see Gyami Dit Singh and Professor Gurmukh Singh there, they were both what we call Majbi Sikhs. They were Dalit, low caste. When Professor Gurmukh Singh would go do katha in Gurdwara, they would let him speak from the stage, but then they would make him go sit in the jode outside and not let him sit in the divan. They kicked him out of the Khalsa Panth. He actually he was at Tankaya for teaching true Gurmat Sikhi. This is an old picture of Bhai Singh, because most of these pictures show them as old guys, and what I wanted to say is when the Singh Sabha started, these guys were in their 20s. They were writing books, they were starting colleges, starting schools, teaching Sikhi, and how were they making what was the revolution of the Singh Sabha? It was reconnecting to Guruji. Where are we as a community right now? Any time the Khalsa Panth has achieved anything of any worth, it is through connecting to Bani, connecting to Sikh history, and living our proper lihit. That is the only time we're able to achieve anything. So they made huge changes. They started to publish steeks of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. They started to publish sakhis that had been lost. They started to teach Bhai Gurdas Ji's Vana and other shabads that Sikhs didn't even know about anymore. They started to bring back all these old traditions as they understood it. Now, a lot of what they did might seem not antiquated to us today, but for their time period, it was what they needed. We need our own movement now to make Sikhi relevant to us. Every generation needs that. We need to connect to Guruji inside of us, Vaheguru, and to connect to Sangat. And that's what they were able to achieve. So, from that time period, when we were living in the jungles, our Gurdwara started to be controlled by Nirmala and Udasis mainly, we call them Mahants. These were people who had Sikhi, love for Sikhi and respected Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, but were not Khalsa. But just like the Jathas had become corrupted and it became about going to the next sun, so had the Mahants. I couldn't find a picture of an old Mahant. This is a Mahant from nowadays. But anyways, these are the types of guys that were controlling Gurdwara 80 years ago, just so you get an idea. Okay? And this is what Gurdwaras looked like 80 years ago. On the doorway of Darbar Sahib was a statue of Shiva. I want to talk about what the state of our Gurdwara were after 200 years outside of Sikh control. And some of this stuff is going to be disturbing. It's important to learn though. The head Granthi of Darbar Sahib, Sikhs complained that women going to Darbar Sahib were being harassed by the Granthis there. And the head Granthi of Darbar Sahib made a statement, and he said, if you allow your women to come here, then we have to treat them like they're prostitutes, because why else would they be coming alone to a Gurdwara? So those are the types of statements that were being made. Gan Singh Nabha wrote a book, the Singh on the right there. He wrote a book called Hum Hindu Nahi Hai. Hum Hindu Nahi. This is a book talking about how Sikhi is separate from Hinduism. That same head Granthi of the Darbar Sahib, do you know what he wrote a book? Anybody want to guess what it was called? Hum Hindu Hai. Hum Hindu Hai. Okay? So these guys had control of all the Gurdwara. Who would want to give it up? Those Sikh Raje, they had been giving them tons of money. You know, the Darbar Sahib never always used to be covered in gold, right? They had been giving them money, they had been giving them land. These guys had huge amounts of what are called jagirs, huge plots of land in their names. They had a lot of power, they did not want to give it up. Who would want to give it up? But the Khalsa Panth, because they had started to connect to genuine Sikhi. So if, let's say you're in a Sangat, you start learning about what Guruji is actually teaching, then you go to your Gurdwara and they're doing Murti Puja, and they're not letting low caste people into Divan, and they don't let women take part in any seva, you're going to say, this isn't matching with what I'm learning about Sikhi. They said, we have to change our Gurdwara, and they started to change. They started to work towards changing their Gurdwara. So the first movement to change Gurdwara, everyone know the person on the right? It's Bhai Santbir Singh. And on the left, anyone recognize that Gurdwara? Hanji? It's Rakabganj. What happened at Rakabganj?
The British wanted to take...
No, I mean, what's the Gurdwara famous for?
Well, that's where Guru Tegh Bahadur body.
Yeah, so Guru Tegh Bahadur's sanskara theo, I say his body, by Lakhi Shah, that was his house, he burned down his mansion to do proper sanskara of Guru Tegh Bahadur's body, right? It became a Gurdwara Rakabganj. It was on the outside of Delhi. but the British wanted to make a beautiful new city to celebrate their empire. And they called their new city New Delhi, right? And they wanted it designed really amazing with a parliament and president house in the middle, and with all the sort of streets coming out, kind of like Washington DC's design. And there was a problem though. One of their roads, it cut right through the edge of the property of Gurdwara Rakabganj. And the British thought, whatever, we'll just go in, tear down the wall and make our road. Sikhs won't say anything, they're useless. They haven't said anything in 50 years, we've been controlling them. But when it came to our Gurdwara, and this is an amazing thing, we saw this last year with, or earlier this year with Rajwana in Punjab, is that even when we as a community look like we're useless, we still have a spark inside of us that can be ignited very easily. And especially when it comes to Gurdwaras being desecrated or being taken by foreign powers, that's something that Sikhs won't stand for ever in Sikh history. And so even though they didn't touch the Gurdwara, it was just this edge, 30 feet on the edge of the big property of the Gurdwara, they were making their road. A protest started spontaneously, and Bhai Singh was part of that protest. And because of that protest, he was sent to jail for how many years, anyone know?
16.
Yeah, and moved from jail to jail to jail during that time, and treated terribly for this protest of protecting the rights of Gurdwara Rakabganj. That protest, there's a non-violent protest happened in 1914. So when people say that Gandhi started the non-violent protest movement, does anybody know what Gandhi was doing in 1914? He was in South Africa. He was raising troops for World War I for the British government to fight for Britain, Mr. Nonviolence, and he was writing books about how black people were animals that could never be trusted to run their own country. So we need to challenge the misconceptions that the Indian government puts out there too. Who created real nonviolent protests? It was Gursikh Bhai Singh, not Gandhi. In 1919, Jallianwala Bagh massacre happened. On Vaisakhi Day, the Sikhs were doing a protest. The British came and they killed over 1,000 people, majority of them Sikh, in Amritsar, just a few blocks away from the Barsad. You guys have been to the Barsad. It's a real disgrace what they've done to Jallianwala Bagh. If you look there, on some one hand, it's interesting. You know, in the Barsad complex, you cannot find a bullet hole anymore. It's very hard to find from '84. But there, every bullet hole has a little marker around it because the Indian government wants to maintain it. But when it comes to a Sikh massacre, they want to wipe out the memory of it. But they have in the middle there a big Shiv lingam. So they celebrated the Shahidi of Sikhs with a giant Shiv lingam. If you look at the pictures, that's what it is. It's a lingam of Shiva to commemorate the Shahidi of Sikhs. That's what the Indian government does. Anyways, 1,000 Sikhs got killed, and they were killed by this guy, General Dyer. So this is what really kick-started a mass movement. Gurdwara Rakabganj happened in 1914, but it wasn't a big movement. This is one of the most disgraceful. When people say the Panth is such a bad state right now, Sikhs, what's going on with Sikhs today? It's so terrible. I say, you have no idea how bad Sikh history, how the depths that we sunk to in Sikh history. This guy was brought to the Barsad. He was brought to the Barsad after he killed 1,000 Sikhs. He was brought into the Barsad, and they did an Amrit Sanjar for him in the Barsad, with Panch Pyare. They gave him Amrit. I don't know if we can call it Amrit, but they did Khandedi Pohol. They gave him Amrit, and he goes, I can't keep my hair. They said, it's okay, you got one chance, good enough. This is for real, this is true. He said, I drink a little bit, I drink. I'm not giving up drinking. And they're like, you know, just cut back, maybe only once a day. And he's like, ha ha ha, okay, that's good, once a day. Then he said, I smoke cigarettes. And they're like, oh, no, that's not acceptable. You know, we're Sikhs, cigarettes are very bad. But if you promise, listen to this, if you promise to cut back on one cigarette per year for the rest of your life, one cigarette per year, then it's all good. He goes, okay, I can do that. After this disgusting display, he was taken to a Kaltak, and then he was given a Saropa by the Jathadar of Kaltak. How many Sikhs had you?
He was like the Nana of Sumiti Singh, right?
It was the Jathadar was Sanjay.
Yeah.
So, I forgot his name. Oh, now, you know? Era the Boosi. No? I don't know.
Or something like that.
His samadhi is there, and people still. Chutiya maar desi ode samadhi te nahi log. Yeah. Or Jathadar the samadhi te. In the independence time, people would, when they would go by the guy's samadhi, the Jathadar, they would hit their chutiya on it, because of this disgust. Now, how many Gursikhs were given a Sropa by the Akal Takht in the 20th century? Does anybody know? Two, which ones were they? It was Bhai Nadir Singh and Bhagat Pooran Singh. And Dyer. And Baba Janel Singh was given one posthumously after he got Shaheed. So this is what the state of the Panth was. So when we think of the Akali Dal today, we're like, Akali Dal sounds like a terrible thing. But it was an amazing thing when it started. It was regular Sikhs from prints and cities and towns of Punjab standing up and saying, we are going to take control of our destiny, we're going to take control of our institutions, this is not far enough. So why does a lot of you guys are part of Jathas, you wear black dastars, you know why you guys wear black dastars? It's because Bhai Nadir Singh, does anyone know why Bhai Nadir Singh wore black dastar? Protest. It was Kali Dal protest. The color of the Kali Dal protest was black or dark blue, okay? And so they call themselves Akali Dal because they were recreating the same things that had happened. Banda Singh Bahadur's army, Guru Har Gobind's army, Akali Dal, the Akalpur Ki Fauj. That's what they call themselves. What they are today, let's forget. Let's talk about them 80 years ago, or 100 years ago, 1920, right? Now I want to really look at the next slide. I want you to notice the two slides on the top. What do you guys notice about them?
There's women.
They're Bibia. So this is Jathas, Shahidi Jathas of women and men. And what would these Shahidi Jathas do? They would go out and they would do a das at Akal Takht or the Barsab or at any Gurdwara, and they would say, we are going to go protest today, non-violently, we're not going to fight back, and we are going to make a promise to not fight back, doesn't matter what the British do, and if we get Shaheed, then so be it. And on my talk on Monday, we're going to be talking about a really amazing Bibi Babirkor, who is Shaheed the Jeto Marcha, and we can talk, and we'll talk about a couple of other Qurbaniyan in a second. But I want you to look at these people. When we think about Sikh history, we need to stop thinking about just the heroes of the Panth. We need to start thinking about these people. These were like our grandmothers and grandparents. They might not have been perfect Sikhs, but when the Panth called on them, they were willing to drop what was happening in their lives and make a commitment and go and protest and give up their lives, if need be. They had that within them. They may not have kept all the it, they may not have done everything properly, but they were struggling to, they were trying to become better Sikhs. And as a group, as a community, like in Sangat this morning, when we come together, even though all of us have our own, I know that I've got a lot of my own issues, I don't keep a lot of the level of government that I want, but in Sangat, as a collective, we have an amazing power. And that's what they were able to do here. A very inspiring movement. Of course, everything happens with Guru Sahib's blessing. And I want to talk about, because we talked about how bad the state of the Darbar Sahib was, it was really interesting. Out of all the Gurdwara that were freed, the Darbar Sahib was the easiest to free. There was no fighting involved, no killing involved, nothing. And you know why? One thing that these Morche Wale did, same thing that Banda Singh Bahadur did, same thing that Jathas did, they started going out and they started preaching. It wasn't just about fighting for our rights, it was about helping other people. And low caste people started to convert to Sikh in big numbers in the 1920s. They were inspired to become Sikhs. And a Jatha of low caste Sikhs went into the Darbar Sahib demanding control of the Gurdwara. And the Granthis there lost it, because they would not let anyone even come past the gate of the Darbar Sahib. They wouldn't let anyone in who was low caste, sorry. So they came up with a compromise, because they're in the Darbar Sahib, but even the Granthis had a little bit of respect. They said, we will take a hukam from Guru Granth Sahib Ji and we will follow what Guru Sahib Ji says. Bhai Sahib, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਜੋ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਹੈ?
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਸੋਰਠ ਮਹੱਲਾ ਤੀਜਾ ਦੁਪਤਕੀ ਨਿਗੁਣਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪੇ ਬਖਸ਼ ਲੈ ਭਾਈ ਸਤਿਗੁਰ ਕੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਲਾਏ ਸਤਿਗੁਰ ਕੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਉੱਤਮ ਹੈ ਭਾਈ ਰਾਮ ਨਾਮ ਚਿਤ ਲਾਏ ਹਾਜੀਓ ਆਪੇ ਬਖਸ਼ ਮਿਲਾਏ ਗੁਣਹੀਣ ਹਮ ਅਪਰਾਧੀ ਭਾਈ ਪੂਰਾ ਸਤਿਗੁਰ ਲੈ ਰਲਾਏ ਰਹਾ.
So the actual Shabad is quite a bit longer, it's a few more 40s, but we get the gist of it in the first 40 here under the Hauta. Here they're saying these low caste people are worthless, they're nothing. They don't deserve to be in the Darbar Sahib. They say, let's take a hukam. What does Guruji say about worthless people? Guruji said, those you consider to be worthless, they are blessed by Guruji. And he says, nothing is higher than Seva of the Guru. What did those Sikhs want to do in Darbar Sahib? They want to do Seva of the Guru. Now those Masants, those Mahants that were in there, in Darbar Sahib, were so shocked because the Shabad was so perfect for the situation that they literally ran away in that moment. And so the first battle of the Gurdwara reform movement had been won. The Khalsa Panth had won over control of Darbar Sahib and Akal Takht. There's a little bit more to the story, but we don't have time to go into full details. But the rest of the morcha were not as easy. Guru Ka Bagh was a really difficult one. Many Sikhs were killed there, beaten to death by British forces. You can see the British soldiers, a lot of them are Indians, so it wasn't just Angrez, it was also their people who were working for them. And it's nice to see pictures too. Here you can see at the Guru Ka Bagh morcha, what are they doing to the Gursikhs that they've caught? They're stripping them naked. So taking off their kakars, taking off their dastars and their kange karpans, and leaving them just in their kache as a way of humiliating them. This is what the Sikhs had to deal with at that time. Here we can see a Jeto morcha. Can everyone see the bottom of the picture? What's on the bottom? It's the body of a Gursikh who's been killed. So a Jeto morcha is a really inspiring account of it by this guy. I forgot his name now. He's a friend of Gandhi's actually. He was a Christian priest who was actually in support of the independence movement. And he says, I forgot the exact quote, and we should find it, and I should have put it in here, but he says something like, I thought that there was only one Jesus Christ in the world. He goes, but what I saw at Jeto today has changed my mind. He said, I saw groups of Sikhs. So what they would do is that there would be 6 of them in a line, 5 or 6, and they would walk right up to the British soldiers. And the British would take their clubs and hit them in the head. And they wouldn't flinch, they wouldn't move, they wouldn't step back, they would just stand there doing their Dasmi Bar. As soon as they got hit in the head, they would stand up again, and the British would hit them again. Now, has anybody ever had like their younger brother or sister take an elastic and point it at them? And what do you do when that happens? Flinch, right? Now imagine someone has got a huge stick, and they're going to hit you in the head with it. Do we have the focus of mind and the connection with body to be able to stand in that moment and not flinch? So they kept getting hit until they weren't able to get up anymore, and they would roll off to the side. And then the next line would come up. And all day long. So this Christian guy, what did he say in that? It's very close to what Bhai Sahib said yesterday. What does Guruji want us to be? Devte. He doesn't want us to worship Devte, he wants us to become. That Christian priest, he goes, today I saw 1,000 Jesus Christ. He said, I thought there was only one, but he's calling all those Gursikhs Jesus Christ. For him, a Devta, right? The highest thing you can think of. That these Gursikhs are so amazing. They are like Jesus Christ. So Sarka Panja Sahib is a very also interesting and amazingly inspiring story. And I want to go into it. We have time still, right? So it's most of us have seen this picture, right? In Gurdwara and stuff, we've seen the picture. So the Guru Ka Bagh morcha started, if you can believe it, because Gursikhs wanted to do Langar Seva on the Gurdwara. The Gurdwara called Guru Ka Bagh, they wanted to do Langar Seva. The Mahants weren't doing Langar Seva. To do Langar Seva, most Gurdwara properties in those days used to have a small stand of trees to cut down lucker from to make the langar. Because it was wooden stoves then, wooden fire pits, right? And 5 Gursikhs had gone in as a jatha to cut down trees to make langar. And they were arrested by the British and sent to jail for 6 months for cutting down the trees. And then the Guru Ka Bagh morcha started. The Sikhs in the jail had just been arrested in Guru Ka Bagh and were going to a jail in the eastern part of Punjab, western part of Punjab, sorry. And the Sangat at Panja Sahib made a langar and did ardas to Guruji that we want to give langar to our brothers and sisters who have given themselves up for arrest just for langar. We want to give them langar just to say thank you for the seva they've done for the Panth. Now when they came and they told the British officials at the train station, they said, no, they're not stopping us, there's no way. And the Jathadar of the local Sangat said, if Guru Sahib can stop the giant Patthar, because it's Panja Sahib, right? He goes, us, the Sikhs of the Guru, what is a train to us then? It's nothing. So they lay down on the train tracks. And the train came, and it wouldn't stop, and it ran over 3 of the Gursikhs, and finally came to a stop. Now later on they asked the engineer, why did you finally stop? You had orders not to. He said, I didn't do it, it just stopped on its own, the brakes went on. That's what the British engineer said. The Gursikhs who got injured refused to let anybody take care of them while they were injured, said, no, first feed langar to the Sangat inside the train, then take care of us. One of them was 30 years old, the other one was 18 years old. And the 18-year-old, as he was dying, he was reading Kabirji sloks, and he called his wife over, who was also 18, and he said, all I have is one request is don't cry, and just do Nam Simran after I die. And they say that she was an amazingly inspirational Gursikh in Panja Sahib, and she was famous for doing Nam Simran her rest of her life, and was a big inspiration to the Sangat there. So we can see what type of Gursikhs they were. Now, we want to talk about one other very important incident, which is Sakka Nankana Sahib, where Gursikhs had gone to free Nankana Sahib. Now the Mahant of Nankana Sahib had seen all these other Gurdwaras, and this movement's going strong, all these other Gurdwaras are falling to the Khalsa Panth, the Masands are on the run, so he hires a little private army with the British help, and he gets all these, what would you call them, thugs, Notagi and stuff, and he hired them to wait inside of Nankana Sahib for the Jathas that were coming. And once the Jathas came, it was a complete massacre. 150 Gursikhs were shaheed. 80 of them were shaheed inside the Diwan Hall at Nankana Sahib. They were killed trying to keep respect for Guru Granth Sahib Ji. They were trying to protect Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and they were killed there. And here's a picture of their bodies after the Hanji.
On the same note, like a lot of people, like in Tab Bachchan, like he keeps on saying, "Oh, I'm half Sikh" kind of deal. But his mom's, his grandpa was actually supported his grandpa was a Mahant, and he supported the Mahant Narayan Das. I think that's what his name was.
Okay, yeah, no,
Yeah, he supported his move to kill those Gursikhs and burn them in Nankana Sahib.
There you go.
So, yeah.
Plus the stuff he said in '84. of
Yeah,
course, too.
and the things that he did.
Now the other really amazing thing about it is that this is the first time that this was a global movement. On the left side you see Shanghai Jatha. It says martyr band from Canada going to Jeto Morcha. Those are Gursikhs from Vancouver who had stopped in Shanghai and were going to give Qurbani at Jeto Morcha. These people had come under difficult circumstances to BC, faced so much discrimination, working terrible jobs, desperately trying to build a life. But when the Panth needed them, they dropped everything and went back to Punjab. On the right-hand side, it says Shanghai Shahidi Jatha Martyr Band. That's a Jatha from Shanghai. Shanghai used to have a big Sikh Sangat because it was back in the day of boat travel. It was a place where a lot of the boats would stop before they came to North America. There's still a small Gurdwara there, I believe, but I don't know if there's many Sikhs left in Shanghai. So the whole Panth got united behind this movement. Now, unfortunately, when they made the reforms, not everything got reformed. So when people say, this is a Maryada of this Gurdwara, you guys can't criticize it. Bibi aren't allowed to do kirtan there, that's the way it's always been. Or we wash the Harmandir Sahib in milk every night, that's the way it's always been. It's not the way it was always been. That's not what Guru Arjan Sahib Ji did. That's the way it was done under Masans for 200 years. So when we talk about Maryada of Gurdwaras, we don't know what the original Maryada of Gurdwaras were because we had no control over them for 2 centuries. 2 centuries is a very long time. And that's a time period where we lost almost all of our historical documents. So those anti-Gurmat practices that we see in Gurdwaras today still are a result of when the Gursikhs came in and took control. They made a lot of changes, but they didn't go all the way, unfortunately. Maybe either those reforms were too difficult to make, or because it was something that they didn't think of as being anti-Gurmat at that time. Anjali.
So the milk washing after Mandir side wasn't original, so it's from the Mahant?
Well, let me ask you this. Why milk washing so milk washing comes from Mandar, they wash Mandars in milk. Why do you think they wash Mandars in milk? Your cow is pavitra, right? The cow is their ma, right? The cow is their mother. We laugh, but it's true. This is what they consider the gaw, right? And so what is the holiest thing to a Hindu? cow, and therefore the milk of the cow is the holiest thing, right? It's like Amrit to them, right? It's considered one of the things, one of the jewels that Shiva churned out of the ocean, right, was a cow. So washing a gurdwara in milk, does that make sense from a Gurmat perspective?
No.
Is milk cleaner than water, or is milk full of bacteria? Right? I mean, just from a sensible point of place. Secondly, would Guruji be wasting milk on washing buildings, or would he be giving milk to the Garib people that needed to? I mean, so there's a lot of arguments because we're not going to get obsessed with it. My point, my perspective is that this type of stuff is not Gurmat. You might disagree. I don't want to get into that discussion right now. But the problem was, once we came in and the SGPC came in, so the Shromani Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee was made at the beginning of the movement. And when it was made, it was an amazing institution. It was the idea that the whole Khalsa Panth can together as a democratic body vote and control our own Gurdwaras. And it's really one of the most amazing things about it was that right from the beginning of the SGPC in 1920, women were given a vote. At that time, women did not have the vote in America or most of Europe. Women were only given the vote in Switzerland in 1972, but they had already the vote in SGPC in 1920. So even though the community wasn't equal, we had these traditions there still. But with the SGPC and with creating, and here's the same thing, now instead of copying Hindu Raj, what were we copying? We're copying a British model of having a legislative body, having elections every 2 years, and that's how we started to run our Gurdwaras. So all of the problems in our Gurdwaras today, elections, right? And the fights that happened because of elections, that started with the SGPC, unfortunately. So those Gursikhs did amazing Qurbani, freed our Gurdwara, and they said, how are we going to run our Gurdwara? Instead of going back to the authentic Khalsa tradition of Panch Pyare, or Sabat Khalsa, or Sangat decision making, they said, we'll do what the British are doing. They have a pretty good system. They have a legislature, they have votes, they have MPs. We'll split up Punjab into different districts, and we'll have seats, and we'll run our Gurdwara like the British do. And it's led to a state of place where we see, and you guys have all seen the terrible pictures of Babatal and other places where our historical artifacts, our history is being destroyed because it's being run by bureaucrats who don't have an authentic relationship with Bani and with Sikh Ityas or Guruji, and for them it's just a job now. And you get weird things happening, like after 84 there was these huge fights over the head Granthi Darbar Sahib because he wanted to wear gold dastar. They said, no, you have to wear Nokwali dastar because the SGPC constitution says you have to wear exactly this type of clothes. So becoming obsessed with weird rules because they had become a government body. So getting outside of the Panthik tradition of how to run our institutions. So even though they did amazing things, these Gursikhs, they made the big mistake of copying a model that was not a Sikh model. So we have institutions, Akali Dal, SGPC, and Sikh Ret Maryada are the three big leftovers from the Morche of the 1920s. Now, we're not going to get into the Ret Maryada because I know it can be controversial for a lot of people, but I want us to think about it in these terms. When every Gurdwara had a weird Maryada going on and all sorts of strange things happening, the Panth needed to come up with something. Here's how you run Gurdwara. Stop doing crazy stuff in Gurdwaras. This is what you need to do in Gurdwara. So that's what it was. It was a base document. But it's become very controversial for the same reason that it's sort of become this legalistic document. But we're not a legal people. We don't have mullahs. We don't have rabbis that go over rules like that. The real rules of a Gursikh is a genuine connection to Guruji and what they feel is right as a Sangat coming together. That's how Sikhs used to run Gurdwaras. And you have here on the left is Teja Singh Samundri Hall. You guys have all seen this building. It's near the Sarans, behind Babatal, on the Langar side of Darbar Sahib. So this is where SGPC meetings are held. Same thing, SGPC today, in their last election, last year or this year? It was this year, right?
Last year.
Their election, an election commissioner from the Indian government wrote a report, and you can find this online, where he said, it is troubling how much drugs and alcohol are being used in the SGPC elections to win votes. We're not talking about Punjab, we're talking about Gurdwara election. They are openly using opium and alcohol to get votes for Gurdwara elections. So when you come up with a system of elections to run Gurdwara, things fall apart, and we can see it in our Gurdwara here too. Now, as a community, we've looked at 4 different movements here today, and that's a lot of work. And you guys had a late night and an early morning, but I want us to leave here, and maybe if we have time to discuss, how do we achieve greatness as a community? How does a Khalsa Panth transform the world? We transform the world by connecting with Guru. Through Bani, through Simran, through Sangat. Those Jathas that were living in the jungles were so powerful because their daily rehat was so amazing that they were inspiring to the people around them. A very easy book to read, and it's written quite simply, it's like for kids, is Sundari by Bhai Singh. And it's a fictional book, but it talks about what happened during that time from the perspective of a young Bibi who has been taken as a slave by the Afghanis and who is freed by a Jatha of 6 and then goes to live in the Jatha and becomes a Khalsa. And it's amazing to see because he talks about what kind of jivan these people had. They inspired people. When we got away from inspiring, when we become obsessed with power and wealth, then we fall apart. When we copy other models and don't stay true to Khalsa models. We have Sarbat Khalsa, we have Panch Pyare, we have Sangat. We have different traditions Guru Gobind Singh Ji left us with. In 5 months, a tiny group, I don't know how big the Khalsa army was under Banda Singh Bahadur, but it couldn't have been more than 10,000 people. Were able to free one of the most important provinces of the Mughal Empire in 5 months with very little resources, just through sheer force of will and tenacity. So we need to ask ourselves, what will our next revolution be? For myself, I think that if you look at Sikh history, we've had different types of revolutions. We have educational type, like the Singh Sabha led. We've had reform movements, like Gurdwara Reform Movement. We've had political struggles, like Punjabi Suba. And we've had ones where we fought in battles, like Khalistan, what happened after Chirasi, or what happened in the 1700s. So now, I don't want us to think about Punjab. It's important what's happening there, and we need to stay connected, and maybe we'll get a chance to discuss it in our workshops. But we're not in Punjab. We're living here, and we need to stop talking about other places' problems and focusing on our own Sangats here. All of those revolutions happened with Gursikhs in their own local Sangats in their own communities. Bhai Veer Singh and Khan Singh Nabha and those Gursikhs didn't just all of a sudden become powerful members of the Panth and were given lots of respect. Professor Gurmukh Singh, like I said, he would try to go teach Gurmat in Gurdwara, and he would be disrespected and told to sit in the shoes and not be given prashad or langar. Us today, now if I came to Khalsa camp and I made a speech and then Japna made me sleep outside and didn't let me eat anything, I wouldn't want to come back to Khalsa camp, right? I'd be like, forget that, they didn't treat me very well, you know? I'm mad because he didn't give me a clicker and I have to push the button on the computer. And he promised me there'd be a clicker. So, you know, what is our mentality? We think we're so great, we're helping the Panth. Instead of thinking we are a slave of the Panth. Guru Panth da Das. You know, that's how they sign the letters always, even now all the Kali leaders, everybody, but they don't mean it anymore. But what does it really mean? Guru Panth da Das is slave of the Guru Panth. I will do anything the Panth asks me to do. So that Gursikhs would go and drop everything, be it in the Banda Singh Bahadur time or the Reform Movement time. And I want us to think about the Anglo-Sikh Wars. It's a very forgotten period of Sikh history, but it's one of our darkest. How did we end up in such a bad state of affairs? You saw what Ranjit Singh's kingdom had become. When he died, what the level of Gursikhi was at that time. And all the manmat that they were doing. They lost this amazing kingdom because they had strayed so far away from Sikh Rehat. So, what time is it, Shapna? Okay, so I guess we're done. Yeah. So sorry it took so long. It was we were originally going to break up into smaller groups and look at the 4 revolutions, but I thought making everyone read and study things might be a little too much. And I also wanted to talk more, you know? I thought I'd just talk. I didn't realize it'd take up the whole time, but maybe we can have a couple of questions and we can talk later in the workshop too. Hanji Benji?
I really enjoyed your talk. You're very knowledgeable. But I have one thing which really bothers me all the time.
Hanji.
Ever since I was brought up when I was a little kid, I was always told that women and men are equal in Sikhism.
Yeah.
And I hold my head really high, saying I'm a baby. I thought at the start because we're equal.
Yeah.
My first trip when I got married, I went to India. Harmandir Sahib, Bibia were not allowed to do kirtan. It was my greatest living nightmare when I was sitting in Harmandir Sahib for the first time.
Yeah.
I couldn't focus on kirtan. I said, why aren't Bibia allowed to sit there? But now it still bothers me. But when I see only Panjapyare, all men doing Panjapyare seva, it really bothers me when I see Panjapyare Prashad going only to men. I find it really disturbs me. If you can shed some light to that, I really
You know,
appreciate it.
like I said, a lot of this Maryada, and specifically that, I remember being at Amritsar and seeing Gores that were visiting, like tourists did down there, right? The Bar Sahib now. And they would come up and they could put their shoulder on the Palaki Sahib when they carried Guru Granth Sahib Ji Takal Takat. So a non-Sikh who knew nothing about Sikhi, and afterwards they were like cheering, like, woo, we got to touch it, it was awesome. You know, like they had no idea. They just thought it was this cool big thing happening and they just wanted to touch the Palaki. No respect at all. They were allowed to touch the Palaki, but Singh was not allowed to. This is a ridiculous situation. So these are the leftovers of the Mahant times. You know, every year on Diwali, anyone been to Zur Sahib on Diwali? They wash the whole outside of the takat in milk. The whole outside of it. So, and Zur Sahib, all sorts of stuff happens. We've all seen videos, you know? So the reason why is because the Morcha never made it to Zur Sahib. It was a Punjab movement. The Indian government never let it go there. It never got reformed. So even in those gurdwaras, there are a lot of practices, and that's why we have to challenge people when they say, this is the way it was always done. You know, the way the Bar Sahib looks today, it only looks like that since the 1930s. Even up to the 1920s, before the SGPC came in, it was kacha. There was no marble everywhere. It wasn't like now it's one giant gurdwara, you take your jode off outside. Before, you take your jode off right at Darshan Diodi, and take your jode off there and then go inside the Bar Sahib. And there used to be shops and stuff on the Sarovar, on the edge. And this was one of the problems actually, that people used to be selling tobacco and stuff on the Prakarma of the Bar Sahib. So the reforms are good and they're bad. There's always a double edge to it, because in some ways it's now created this feeling of like, we just marbleize everything, you know? Everything's covered in marble, everything's white, everything looks all pure and clean. It's not very comfortable to walk on, you know, the Prakarma. It's not the greatest system to have everything covered. There used to be beautiful trees all around. If you guys look at old pictures of the Bar Sahib, there used to be trees all around. Sangat used to be able to sit in the shade, you know? So, in some ways, the reforms were necessary. They destroyed a lot of the amazing architecture of the buildings that used to be around the Bar Sahib. But on the other hand, I'd rather have these guys than the Mahants that used to be there, you know? Where BBM weren't allowed into the Bar Sahib at all at that time. So the reason why BBM aren't allowed to kirtan is because when they came in, they made compromises. They didn't go all the way on the reforms. They didn't make all the changes that were necessary. They kind of stopped short. But there's no reason why the Maryada at one Gurdwara should be different at any other Gurdwara. The Bar Sahib in the end is still a Gurdwara, right? Hanji.
Can I just add something? I'm not trying to take away from the conversation.
Yeah.
So Sikh women have played a really big part. I mean, when Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj left Anandpur Sahib, he left.
Beat the airport.
Yeah, he left. What's it called? In charge of protecting Anandpur Sahib from the Mughals. So 100 Singhs stayed, 100 cars stayed behind at Anandpur Sahib when Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj left to Chamkaur Sahib. A lot of people don't know that.
We're going to be talking about that Monday.
Yeah. Oh,
Stop
sorry.
stealing money.
And we're going to talk about Banda Singh Bahadur's. And it was recorded by Bahadur Shah's, one of Bahadur Shah's wives, who was the Mughal emperor. That Banda Singh Bahadur also had Sikh women.
It was the Jathas.
Okay, yeah, the Jathis had Sikh women fighting alongside them with the stana and shastras and everything.
You know, just to, because this is a topic, and I don't want to say let's talk about it on Monday.
Sorry.
We can talk about it quickly now as well. But that is what the talk is going to be about on Monday, is that Sikh history has been written by men. Sikh history has also been written by certain groups. So if you look at Sikh history, the importance of certain jats has been given more importance than other jats, unfortunately. The early leadership of the Khalsa Panth was mainly what we call low castes. Of the Tarna Dal, when the Tarna Dal was made, the Panch Jathe that were made of the Khalsa Panth, the Jathedars of 3 of the 5 Jathas were what we would now consider low caste people. Those Sikhs aren't well memorized in Sikh history because those people didn't write history, unfortunately, and the Panth later on became more caste oriented. Same way, the first writer of history in the Sikh tradition is Bibi Sarup Kaur, the daughter of Guru Har Rai Ji. adopted daughter of Guru Har Rai. And many people don't even know that Guruji adopted a girl. Back then, adopting a child is a big deal. Adopting a girl is a really big deal. And then to educate your daughter, for her to be a historian. But we lost a lot of our tradition and a lot of our history, unfortunately. When Mir Mandir took over Punjab, they destroyed so many pothia and Guru Granth Sahib Ji Veers and other Gurkha and historical texts that the canals of Punjab were clogged. That's what they said. So we lost generations of Sikhs during those times. But we have to be careful when we talk about Sikh history. This is how it's always been done in Sikh history. We don't know a lot of things. There was no Anand Karaj done in Punjab from 1800 up to the 1870s. You know, Ranjit Singh and all those guys, none of them had Anand Karaj. They were getting married around fire and all sorts of weird stuff. If you if you studied Ranjit Singh, he had one wedding where they did the ear piercing, another wedding where they do the chunni ceremony, all these weird sort of Hindu ceremonies. He didn't have one Anand Karaj around Guru Granth Sahib Ji with the way we consider it. So a lot of Sikh traditions were lost for a long time. The Anand Karaj tradition was brought back by the Namdadis, who then later on themselves became corrupted, which is also a tradition in Sikh history.
I just wanted to add one point. I know this is an interesting time that you weren't able to, but just contextualizing, you know, what we call the fall of the Sikh Empire in the 19th century onward, that to contextualize it would need kind of a broader South Asian history, and I know that's not, you know, that's not part of this talk. But I bring this up because I think that's really important to do in today's time for us as Sikhs living in the US or Canada. For example, the Rajona protest did take place outside of embassies, which are modern institutions. It didn't take place in gurdwaras.
Yeah.
Maybe some did, but just to contextualize it so that Sikhi as a system, as sovereign as it is, because of these restrictions, still has to function in some kind of larger system, whether that's a sovereign government of a nation, or some other kind of association that it's in. But I think that's important to keep in mind, that this kind of a revolution, as important as it is to occur within an intra-Sikh community, it also needs to take place by Sikhs in the larger surrounding that it's in. So, for example, activism takes place on all different levels for Sikh and non-Sikh issues by Sikhs. So I think an important part of revolution is for it to occur so that it affects outside the people of the community that are running it.
And that's what we see from Sikh history, is that when we become too inwardly focused on our own problems, we lose as a community. But when, you know, they weren't going out and doing missionary work with low-caste people and become Sikhs. They were going out and doing seva for them. You know, in Punjab today, what is happening to low-caste people? They're becoming Christians. Because we are removed from that tradition of doing seva and bringing people and creating an egalitarian society. On a larger political scale, it is interesting, your point that you made, that we're coming at it from a very, from a almost subservient perspective instead of from a sovereign perspective, you know? And it is inspiring, you know, as terrible as Ranjit Singh's Raj was, it's cool to see that the government of his government was called Sarkari Khalsa, you know? That's cool. That he had ambassadors in Europe, and that he had letters from Napoleon and stuff, that like these, that we were a country and a people, you know? So there is that, I think right now though, as a community, my own personal perspective is that we can't become too inwardly focused, but we need to, first of all, re-establish a connection to Sikh history and to Gurmat. We are using old models and we don't have a connection. That's why Sikhi doesn't seem relevant to people anymore. Because we haven't reinterpreted for us. And I don't mean by reinterpret like make Sikhi modern in this sort of idea like let's stop wearing the stars and that type of talk. What I'm talking about is, obviously I don't mean that, but what I'm talking about is those Sikhs in the past, they were able to get inspired because they were reading Bani. They were learning about Sikh history. And those Sakhis that were important in the 1930s were different than the Sakhis that were important in the 1700s. Each generation of Sikhs, they find something new in Sikh history. And that's why Guruji didn't write down any Sakhis. He wanted it to be rediscovered by us, generation by generation. Even today, outside of the basic core concepts of the day, is something that has to progress in the sense that it needs to be made relevant to our lives. And we're not talking about Gas or Kakars or budget credits, those issues, those are in stone. But I'm talking about our lifestyle. We're living here in Canada. What does it mean for our lives? How do we interact with people? How are we activists? How do we interact with other communities, right? How do we, you can see all over North America, Sikh communities are always segregated in their own little areas. We very little interact with other people. Whereas Guru Nanak's model was the opposite. It was about going out and purposely interacting with other people, and even kind of stirring things up on purpose, and being being a radical and getting people to think about the way they were living and interacting with them and changing the way they were living. Guru Nanak, if you read Bhai Gurdasi's Vana, he would purposely wear weird clothes on all of his adasis. Every single dasi he went on, he put on weird looking clothes so that everywhere he went, people would be like, where are you from? Because back then you could look at somebody and you could say, this person is from this part of India, they're Muslim or Hindu, they're this jat, they worship this, you could tell everything right away. But they would see Guru Nanak and they'd say, who are you? And what would he say? We have Siddh Ghosh, Guru Nanak says, I am Nanak and I worship Nirangar. That's what I am. That's an amazing answer. It creates discussion. People say, what's Nirangar? When the whole world is full of deity and devte, and you're saying I worship a formless being, then you've created a discussion, right? So we are very closed off here. We're scared of interacting with other people. That's how Sikhi grows, is through our interactions. It doesn't even have to be conversion. Some of the greatest friends of the Sikh Panth were people like Bir Buddha Shah, who was a Muslim while we're fighting Muslims. Banda Singh Bahadur, I want to finish maybe on this point, is that Banda Singh Bahadur fought these amazing campaigns, and these were singly against Mughal governments that were Muslim dominated, and they even declared jihad on the Sikhs during that time. So it was a religious war. But Muslims, for the first time in Sikh history, converted en masse to Sikhi during Banda Singh Bahadur's time. There are, in old books, you can find names of Sikhs, Muhammad Singh and Ali Singh, common names of Sikhs during that time, which sounds strange, but they would come with their names and they'd be made Singhs. And there's even in an old record of Bahadur Shah, the Mughal emperor, that they were worried because 500 Muslims from the Pind of Batala had joined the army of Banda Singh Bahadur. And not only joined the army, but were given halal meat to eat and care, and given time during the day to do their namaz and all that stuff, and were respected. But they were part of the Khalsa army. And they worked with the Khalsa Panth. We respected them. Even though we're fighting Muslims and they're declaring jihad on us, we were able on a personal level to make connections with people and be transformative. And you know what? A lot of those people probably ended up becoming Khalsa, right? That's how you make people. You don't go out knocking on doors like Christians do and say, Jesus loves you. And I'm not here to criticize, but that, Bhai Gurdasi says, Isaiya Musaya Homme Hiranne. Okay, Jews and Christians have been lost in Homme because they're coming from a perspective of, we know the way and you don't know anything. That's not a Sikhi way. Sikhi way is, we both have Vaheguru inside of us. I want to share this beautiful thing I have with you. Would you want to learn about it with me? And I also want to help you and take care of you and fight for your rights if it need be. And that's how you make connections. That's how, Sikhi started with Bhai Mardana, and now we're all here today, right? So we have to go on and make more Sikhs. That's inevitable. When we stop making new Sikhs, that's when we start falling apart. How'd you Benji?
How you're talking about how the past, a lot of our interactions were with other faiths, and now a lot of people who we interact with are atheists. I'm just wondering, how do you see Sikhs interacting with atheists?
The biggest criticisms of religion that you can find, and the most dead-on criticisms of religion are that subject. You asked this morning, so many of the boarding are just criticisms of religion. There's a lot to talk about with atheists. All the things, you look at Dawkins' book, where he criticizes religion, those are all things that Bhagavad Gita says in Guru Granth Sahib Ji. So Sikhi has a lot in common with atheists in the sense of they don't like organized religion. Because organized religion can be a tool of oppression, it can be corrupt, it can be misused, and Sikhs agree with all that. It's in Guru Granth Sahib Ji as a warning to us as well. But our idea of Akal Purkh Vaheguru is not something limited and closed off in a little box like it is for other faiths. That's why I don't even like to use the word God anymore, because God is such a foreign concept to Sikhi. God is some guy up in the sky, they look up, and now you see paintings of Guru Gobind Singh and Guru Nanak, they're looking up in the sky. There's no looking up in the sky if Vaheguru is inside of you, right? There's very wrong-headed thinking, and even Punjabi mentalities get Rab is somewhere else, right? We have this idea that Rab exists outside of us. Rab is within us. So I think when you interact with people who don't have faith at all, it's actually easier because they're not part of a dogma. You can really explain the beauty of Sikhi and they can be inspired by it. I find that people who are not part of a religion really love to have discussions with you because Sikhi criticizes most of the main things that religions do, you know? In terms of gender inequality, in terms of a priestly caste, you know, having priests, having special protection. In an ideal Sikh Sangat, everyone would go up and be a Granthi, would be a Kirtan, right? And that's what we try to do at our camps, is give everyone a chance to be involved. Did you have something else?
I was going to ask, how do you interact with somebody from a different faith without giving your justification for your practices or your beliefs through their idiom? Because as soon as you do that,
it's very difficult.
It seems like you begin to constrain your
Language.
your understanding. Because if Akal Purkh is Akal and Beant and Agam, right? And then we're trying to explain that, right? There's a lot lost in translation by definition.
I was involved in some really interesting discussions because I was in America when the shootings happened in Wisconsin.
Right.
And they were saying, and the big thing was, how do we go out and teach Sikhi? And we were like, you know, everyone knows what a synagogue is, right? They don't call it a Jewish church, right? They call it a synagogue, and everyone knows what it is. I think we got to stop being ashamed a little bit. And so when people ask, what do you believe in? You say, I believe in Ekko and God. And then if they want a longer answer, then they'll stay and talk to you. And unfortunately, it takes time and effort.
Right.
And it can get frustrating. You know, all of us who grew up with Gis, you know, how many times have you asked the question, do you wash your hair? How long is your hair? Do you take it off at night? And we have to answer these questions again and again and again.
It's more like when they ask you, like, why you keep your kiss, right?
Yeah.
When you're answering to them, you're answering in a way that you're trying to appeal to their senses.
Yeah.
But like from my perspective, at least, Sikhi, you just do it because the Guru told you to, and there's nothing more to it.
There's a beauty in that. I did a workshop on this once. Is that what everyone needs to do at home is we need to come up with a good 2-3 word answer to every one of these questions, and not 2-3 words, a 2-3 sentence answer. And we need to try to frame it in a way that it opens up possibly for discussion for those who are interested, and also is a good succinct answer for those who just want a quick answer and want to walk away. And it's challenging because things like Guru Granth Sahib Ji, how we treat Guru Granth Sahib Ji also, it's very hard to explain how we treat Guruji without framing it in the model of other traditions. Because the way we treat Guru Granth Sahib Ji is something very unique. No other community has that, you know? So it is very hard, and maybe we can talk about that, you know? Japram's saying that I have to stop now. He did this. So thank you, and you know, we have workshops, and there's workshops with the other groups as well. I really appreciate everyone paying attention. I didn't see anyone fall asleep, so no, that's the main key at a government camp, is making sure no one falls asleep. You know, there's a lot of history here, and I make mistakes on the dates and the names a lot of times. So I apologize if I've made mistakes on anything. Please feel free to come up and correct me so that in the future I can try to do it better. I make mistakes also in my ideas. This is my interpretation of Sikh history. So we all need to come up with our own relationship with the Itas and be inspired from it. So thank you very much. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa.